Nothing to the stream there. All right, we are live everywhere by the looks of it. Sweet. We are up and running. So, everybody, just clearing the desk off a little bit, but we are going to be getting into the podcast in a minute. We are going to be talking about switching your focus. We're going to be talking about switching your focus today, but we're going to give it another minute or so before we get started. So as you tune in, I want to thank you all for being here. And as you tune in, I want to remind you that the people we're looking for on these live streams are athletes or people involved in the athlete journey. So that's coaches, that's athletes, that's parents of athletes, anyone involved in that journey of helping athletes reach the top level, helping athletes become the best possible version of themselves they can be. We've been doing the show. I just released episode 147, I believe, this morning. So it's been going on for quite a while. You can find it on any major podcast platform. It's called the Elite Development Podcast. So you can find it at www.elitedevelopmentpodcast.ca or any of the major podcast platforms. So give me 1 second before I get into it. My cat is flipping out, and I just want to make sure. You good? Yeah. Okay. He's good. All right, so we're going to go about 20 seconds. We're going to get into the show. Until then, I just wanted to thank you guys all for being here one more time. If you want to learn a little bit more about me, make sure to drop a follow on any of the various social media platforms that I have running right now. And then we can chat a little bit more about, your career as an athlete, things that you're working towards, and anything else like that. So let's get into the podcast. We're going to be talking about switching your focus. We're going to be talking about switching your focus as an athlete, why this is an important thing to do, what exactly that means, and then how you can go about actually doing it. So let's get into the show, talking about switching your focus in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the show designed to help athletes gain an edge on their opponent and build dream careers in sport. I'm your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we are going to be talking about switching your focus. Now, the reason that I wanted to talk about this today is because I think this is something, I know this is something that many athletes out there struggle with. And I know that this is something that I have struggled with myself in my journey as a business owner, in my old journey as an athlete, and in my journey as a coach. And so this is something that is a very important topic in the world of elite performance sport, but we're going to touch on it in a few different ways. The first way we're going to touch on it is in your career as a whole. So as you likely know by now, if you followed the podcast for a little while, most of my clientele are high performance combat sports athletes. So MMA fighters, boxers, Muay Thai fighters, jiu-jitsu athletes, things like that. And when I talk to these athletes about their goals for their career, they're usually very high. I have a lot of people that want to be UFC champions, a lot of people that want to win gold medals, go to the Olympics, things like that. And when we talk about goal setting, when a lot of these athletes are talking about, the goals for their career and all of that, then when I start asking about, the process, how they expect to actually get there, that's where they struggle, right? Because they think, well, if I just keep training, I just keep fighting, then eventually I make it to the top, right? That's how it happens. Like the guys at the top just train for longer, and then as they train for longer, eventually it works and they get there. But what they're overlooking is the process of actually becoming the athlete you need to be in order to get to the top, becoming the person you need to be to become the athlete you need to be to get to the top. Does that make sense? So if your only focus is on the outcome, let's say right now you're early in your professional career, you got 1 or 2 pro fights under your belt, they're going well, and your goal is to be a UFC champion. Now, the goal is very far away from where you are right now, right? You are very far away from that goal. And so each and every day, it's difficult to picture yourself as that person. It's difficult to picture yourself in that world championship fight. It's difficult to picture yourself with that belt wrapped around your waist. It's difficult to picture that financial situation, that home life, everything that comes with that, because it's very far away. So when it's that difficult to picture, it becomes that much more difficult to continue to give that everything you've got, to continue to work for it at the level you know you need to in order to be successful. Does that make sense? Any one given day, you wake up and you could be thinking, well, one day is not going to make a difference. It's so far away anyway, so I'll just take today off. We'll get back to it tomorrow. Right? And any one time that you do that, you might be right. Any one day isn't going to make a huge difference towards that goal. If you take one day off, that's not going to make or break you. But how many times are you taking that one day off because you're not that close to the goal anyway, and one day is not going to make that big of a difference? So when our whole focus is on the outcome, it's way more difficult to put in the work, put in the effort necessary in order to succeed long term. However, when your focus is on the process, that changes things. Now, what do I mean when I say that? So the number one thing I mean when I talk about focusing on the process over the outcome, when I talk about switching your focus, is that you need to focus on today. Because if your focus remains on today and your focus remains on things you know you can control, things you know you can affect, now you can become better tomorrow than you are today. And that sounds like one of those cliche, silly sayings of, one step forward every single day. But at the same time, that is legitimately how you make it. You don't become a world champion by waking up tomorrow a world champion. You become a world champion by being better tomorrow than you are today, being better the day after than you are tomorrow, and continuing along that path over the course of however many months and years and decades you are away from that goal. So when we talk about focusing on today, we talk about focusing on the process, we talk about switching that focus. The number one thing I want you to do, the number one thing I want you to think about is, what is one thing you can change now that is going to allow you to be better tomorrow? What is one thing you're not doing right now that you can work on to be better tomorrow? And this doesn't have to be specific to training. This doesn't have to be a certain skill. This doesn't have to be, a certain punch or a certain kick or a certain submission that you're looking to improve on. But this is lifestyle things. This is those training, those skill sets. This is your strength and conditioning work. What's an area that you're a little bit weaker right now that needs a little bit more focus? This is your sleep habits. This is your nutrition habits. This is the friend circle you surround yourself with. Every one of these little factors is something you can focus on today that's going to move you closer towards that ultimate goal. So if you're sitting here right now and you go, man, I don't know where to start, ask yourself, what version of you wins that world championship? What version of you reaches that black belt position? What version of you becomes the athlete that you want to be one day down the road? And so one big thing, and I'll use an example from my own career. One big thing for myself as a coach that I've done recently is by looking at the impact that I want to have in my career, by looking at the level I want to get to, the level of athletes I want to work with, how I want to impact those athletes, how I want to impact their families. I understood that a year ago, the person that I was and the person that I was day to day, although I worked hard and although I was already running my business and although I was doing a lot of things right, the person that I was at that time was not the person who was going to achieve those goals. And when I started thinking, who do I need to become in order to achieve those goals, I realized that there was more work that I needed to be doing. And if there's more work that I needed to be doing, I needed to be sleeping better at night, because when I sleep well, I can wake up and I can work all day. When I don't sleep well, when I wake up, I feel like crap. And when I wake up feeling like crap, then my day doesn't get off to a good start. If the day doesn't get off to a good start, I don't get as much done. If I don't get as much done, I don't have that impact I want to have. Right. So one major change that I made was I quit drinking entirely. And I was never like a major alcoholic that was drinking all the time. But my big issue was when I started, I had trouble stopping. So what that would do to me is I'd have that one night where I kind of went off and, was not the best version of myself, to put it lightly. And that would throw off my whole next day, as we all know drinking does. But it would also throw off my sleep patterns for that week, because I would get no sleep that night. And then the whole next day I'd be hungover. And then that next night I probably wouldn't sleep very well, because I was either still hungover or I'd slept through most of the day. And if I'd slept through most of the day, I couldn't get to sleep that night, whatever it might be. So that habit of drinking wasn't just the habit of drinking itself, but it was what it was doing to the rest of my week. And when it was throwing off the rest of my week like that, I wasn't showing up the way I know that I need to show up to achieve the things I want to achieve. So for any athlete watching this right now, what I want to ask you is think about that habit. Think about that habit you still hold that gets in the way. That habit you still hold that, although you might enjoy it in the time, those nights out were always fun. The next days were always regrettable, but those nights out were always fun. But with the goals I have for the future, I had to make a choice. And those nights out were not worth it. Those things that I was doing to myself weren't worth it. So if you're an athlete watching this right now, what I want to ask you is, what is that habit for you? What is that habit for you that you keep holding on to despite the fact that you know it's taking away from what you're trying to achieve? It's taking away from who you're trying to be. It's taking away from the goals that you have for your future. What is that habit, and what's one thing you can do to change that habit? So for me, like I mentioned, that was drinking, and I cut it out entirely. I haven't had a drink in months. I don't miss it. I don't want to really ever. And so since doing that, the size of my business has nearly doubled again. And I'm happier, I'm sleeping better, I'm waking up earlier with no issue in the morning. All of these compound effects of making that change have had a massive positive influence on my life. So for you guys, what is that habit? It could be similar to mine, or it can be something as simple as staying up super late every night watching TV. It can be, when you train, something that you do while you train that, does damage to the body that makes it harder for you to train at a high level, or that, you can deal with right now, but probably isn't sustainable long-term. We all have those habits. We all have those things we do that don't support what we're trying to accomplish. And if you can make those changes, you're going to see longer term success in your sport. It's just how it works. So that is the first part of switching our focus from where we want to end up 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, to switching our focus on how do we improve and how do we take a step towards that today. And if your focus remains there every single day, you're going to start to see improvement. You're going to start to see more results specific to your sport. And in turn, those results and those goals you have set for yourself are going to start taking care of themselves. Now, the next part I want to talk about when it comes to this topic, when it comes to switching your focus, when it comes to focusing on what we know we can control, the next part I want to talk about is in an actual competition itself. In a competition itself, most of the time, athletes are coming into these competitions with the focus on winning. And of course, nobody comes into a competition wanting to lose. But when your focus remains solely on a victory, then you perform in a way not to lose. So in your mind, you're focused only on winning, which means you're trying not to lose. However, when you come into that same performance and your focus is on performing, your focus is on what do I need to do based off of what my opponent's throwing at me. Your focus is simply on performing at your best regardless of the outcome. Now you focus on performing at your best, you put your best foot forward, and in turn, that result takes care of itself. So again, it comes back to the controllables, right? If you're in a competition and a ref makes a call that you don't like, there's nothing that you can do to change that. There's nothing that you can do. You can, likely if you complain, that's not going to go your way. I refed hockey for years. I cannot tell you one time that an athlete complained about a call and I decided to reverse my call and give them what they wanted. That was just never a thing. But if you can focus on the things you can control, you can focus on the things that you can actually affect, that is where you're going to come out on top. That is where you're going to make the biggest difference. And in turn, you're going to see the most success. So I hope this all makes sense. And the way that you continue to maximize that progress over time is, again, continuing to switch that focus. So how do we do it? How do you actually switch your focus? How do you actually understand the difference between focusing on an outcome and focusing on a performance, focusing on a goal and focusing on the process? the way you switch it is, I heard actually an interview leading into UFC 281 this past weekend with Dustin Poirier, and he talked about how throughout fight camps, he has a drawing of a circle, and everything he can control is within the circle. Everything he can't control is outside the circle. And something that simple of anytime he was feeling anxiety, anytime he was feeling frustration, he would come back to that drawing, he would come back to that circle, and he would say, if it's inside the circle, I need to address it, I need to adjust, and I need to move forward. If it's outside the circle, I need to let it go. But being able to do something like that, being able to have that system for yourself, being able to make those decisions and being able to understand, I can affect this, I can change this, I can control this, or this is something outside of my control and I need to let it go, is massive. So as far as the podcast goes, that is it. That is all. However, I would love to hear from you as well. If you're here right now, or if you're watching this back on a replay, if you're listening to this on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. What is that system for you? What is that system for you when you are in that situation where you're dealing with something that you might not be able to control, or you need to readjust your focus? How do you get it done? I see a comment on Instagram, Team 2 Sweet, saying making adjustments is a huge part of it. I completely agree, man. Being able to, again, adjust and focus on what you need to do, not focusing on the outcome, is going to be a massive part of it, right? Because you can do everything right, and then unfortunately, in the world of fighting, you can do everything right, get caught with something, and then go out, and you still lose. But you got to be able to look at the performance, right? If you hang everything on the outcome, you're going to be disappointed a lot more than you're going to be happy. And then, yeah, so something like that, something as simple as being able to make adjustments, whatever it is you're faced with, being able to make an adjustment, being able to, again, refocus on what do I need to do, not how is this going to turn out. It's going to be a huge part of being able to be successful long term. So that is it. That is all. I appreciate you all tuning into the show. Make sure to share the show with a teammate, share the show with a friend, someone else that is going to need to hear this message, someone else that is going to benefit from hearing this message. And you can find the podcast again at www.elitedevelopmentpodcast.ca or all major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere that you find your podcast. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to leave a review, and make sure to send me a message and let me know if you've been listening to the show, what you've been taking away, things that you've enjoyed. And then if you have any topics you'd like to hear more about. So that is it. That is all. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to you all again tomorrow.